and welcome to another episode of Doubl3Tap. Today we are joined by Kam Punia, CEO and founder of Pixion Games, the creators of Fableborne. Kam, how you doing, man?
Yeah, good. Just coming back from a month-long tour of Asia, post Token 2049 BD, but otherwise all
Recovered?
good. I don't think I've recovered just yet, but getting there. All good otherwise.
Sweet. Fableborne's launch is just around the corner. Um, and today's conversation is going to mostly revolve around how you guys think of game design and also touching a bit on like the history of Fableborne, because I think it has quite a colored past, I guess you could say. But before all of that, what games are you currently playing?
I actually just bought over weekend Black Myth Wukong, so
Nice.
that is really stressing me out. And also have a party in Baldur's Gate that's been going on for way too long now. All of us do not have enough time, and so we basically play for a week and then don't play for a month. But eventually we'll finish it. I think we're on Act 3 now, so almost. But those two are sucking all my time right now.
Is that
Yeah.
is that like an online party? Like for the local saves, it's always a struggle for me to coordinate schedules for Baldur's Gate.
It's an online one, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So I have a
that's a
friend that
commitment.
I've basically been playing games with for like 20 years. And anytime we find a really good game that we both like, we essentially just block out our calendar, which is still hard to do and stick to, but we try and commit.
I like that game is just I love it to death, but it's so deep. It's like such a I don't want to say a chore, but it just feels exhausting after a long day.
It's
It's tough.
daunting.
Yeah.
It's daunting. Games like that I could never play by myself, whereas 15 years ago I'd sink hours into it every day. Now, if I'm not playing it with someone else, then there's that social aspect as well. I just can't put my time or even start a game knowing that this is a 50, 60, 70 plus hour experience because it will literally take me the whole year to finish.
Yeah. It switches on that completionist part of my brain, and so I want to know like what are all the dialogue options um, and like saving before fights and stuff, so you can figure out like what was the best option. Like I know it's not the right way to play, but it just kind of like switches that part on.
You're one of those players that I'm annoyed by.
Yeah,
So we go, okay, what's our decision? We stick with it, even if it
yeah,
literally kills off someone and we really don't want that to happen. We've got one shot, we play it through. So yeah, I think I'd go insane playing with you.
That's kind of the approach I take, Cam. My problem is then I like min max every decision, and then it takes me like 5 hours, and it's like one battle because I'm trying to like min max all the positioning and everything, and then I'm
Yeah,
like, oh
yeah.
my god, I don't have time for this. Yeah. Anyways, great game design. Strong recommendation from the Double Tap squad. So, speaking of game design, Cam, one of the things we love about Pixion is just the fact that you guys are so mechanical in testing out different loops, experimenting, figuring out what works, and then kind of having the confidence to kind of scrap, something that maybe wasn't hitting the marks you were looking for. So maybe just to kick us off, could you maybe talk us through a little bit of like kind of the game design philosophy behind Pixion, and then maybe Fableborne more specifically, and if you could maybe give a
Yeah,
couple of
sure. So
maybe just a couple of examples of like things that cause you to decide whether you want to scrap a mechanic or a game and what that kind of looks like.
yeah, of course. So I think we always have a North Star, and that North Star, just a quick TLDR, which is from a content perspective, it's building games that can be played in short snackable sessions, a multiplayer at their core, and can be played by players who are time poor. So those sort of three design pillars, let's say, that formulate that North Star, give us some very clear boundaries of what we want to work on and what we should work on. And then we max that to, well, what's the team's capabilities? Where have we got a lot of experience? Where would we back ourselves to build, top 100 grossing games? And where wouldn't we? And so instantly that takes out a lot of different genres. You say, Cam, hey, let's build a match-free game. I tell you, don't give us any capital. Like, we're not the right team for you. We don't back ourselves to do that. But Mid-core multiplayer, that's our sweet spot. Everyone in the leadership team has been in the space for, a decade plus and had wins specifically in that domain. Specifically in sort of a strategy genre, which I know is a broad genre in itself, but there's some complexity that transcends across all the different core loops. And that then, like I say, refines really what are we going to build and the types of experiences that we think we can build. And so we always start there, and then we start looking at the market, whether there's genres that are stale, rife for innovation. Again, previously, that's where we've all had a huge amount of success, is taking those genres, speaking specifically to and understanding the audience really deeply, mostly mid to elder game players of those genres, validating whether there's any pain points, and then seeing if we can create a familiar but fresh experience that eliminates those pain points and solves those pain points. And so, again, all of this that we're thinking about, I guess almost pre-production, right, and market analysis we do beforehand, and it really refines exactly what we're going to build. And then we start to build, and then from there, I guess we have a few stages. First is as quickly as possible, a quick and dirty prototype. Here we're not even using, maybe we use assets from a Unity store just to visualize. Most times it's quite primitive, literally using shapes, and then a healthy dose of imagination to, I guess, validate, is this core loop fun? And really, the only people that are validating the core loop at that point is us, the team, the studio. If us as builders are playing this and don't find it fun or don't believe, we're excited to build this, we kill it there and then. Because if we're not really, really passionate about what we're building, there's no point in starting. And so I'd say that's the first point we really want to check off. And if then we play and we say, actually, this is really great, we see something here, we feel excited about what we're building, we'll then polish that into a vertical slice, so moving away from primitive shapes and something actually someone out of a studio could play and give us some really strong feedback. And there we're doing I guess an MVP or a vertical slice stealth launch. So it's still really early, just the core loop, but a bit more polished. We test with a few thousand players, and again, we're really trying to get a read or a health check on the core loop. Is it fun? Are players engaged? How many times are they playing? What's early retention like? Before any deep progression, monetization, any sort of blockchain layer, any competitive layer even, just the core loop in its rawest sense. What does that look like even early on? And although the KPIs are not indicative of what your KPIs will be at launch, they're directional. And so again, they give us some insights, and particularly the trends between those KPIs give us clear directional insight into, well, should we spend more time on this? We think it's great, but actually, do we think the market, or is the market responding to the game in the same way? And then from there, we put the game into production. And so we do marketability tests. We're figuring out what the art style should be. We start to focus not only just on speed, but now start to think about scale and longevity as well.
And one of the things you hit on was kind of like breathing fresh life into maybe a particular genre you felt like maybe has become a little bit more unloved. Another part that you mentioned was kind of crafting maybe through like genre mixing or whatever someone might call it, a new type of genre in and of itself. I'm curious, like, how do you guys decide whether you want to kind of test a new type of loop or decide whether you feel like something maybe has gone a little bit stale on the genre side of things?
Yeah, so we again, it all starts with a lot of analysis, and Maria, who you both know, have spoken to, incredible person, has a huge amount of knowledge. She really goes deep as well, and so we have a ton of information to help us make that decision, and we start looking at genres, games, incumbents in those genres, the number of updates, how those updates have been received, whether there's any peak in installs, DAU, even spend or IAP spend, if it's Web 2 specifically that we're looking at. And so all of this again formulates a really in-depth analysis that then we help us make a decision on. There's also a lot of qualitative, feedback as well. And so speaking to, like I say, elder players and mid-game players. So we spoke to actually a lot of players of Clash of Clans, Rival Kingdoms, a few other base building specific genre type games on mobile. I think it was over 2,500 players ultimately that we had feedback from that had filled over a huge survey, which took us over 3 months to accumulate all of that information, but gave us a lot of insight into, like I say, what those pain points are. And then we tried to think about, like I said earlier, is there a solution, or can we build a solution, and what does that solution look like? And that's really where we decided on, the ARPG meets base building strategy of Fableborne. It was taking that problem and taking some of the pain points that players see in current incumbents, and then looking at how do we solve that, and then is it fun? Ultimately, when we put those things together, is there a route to be able to build this game? Could we still monetize it? Do these two genres mesh well together, etc.? That generally formulates, the starting point.
It sounds like you have this kind of formula internally as to how you approach game design. And I know you've scrapped a bunch of core loops in the past, and I'm kind of curious, without like giving away the playbook, do you think this is a product of you and your team just having good taste in games, or is like getting it into the hands of playtesters as early as possible like a big contributing factor?
Yeah, so we killed, for the record, we've killed 5 core loops right before putting them into production. Some of them actually did get feedback, and so one of them in particular we played, and it was straight away, actually, this sucks. This is definitely not the game that we're excited about, and it doesn't play as well as we thought it would play. Some we actually were really bullish on, and then we put it out live, and actually the KPIs are not where we'd want them to be. In terms of the process itself and how we think about it, I'd say it's really a combination of the two. That the team, I always say for the team and the experience that we have is that our experience doesn't tell us what to do, but it does tell us in many areas what not to do. And that in itself is super valuable. There's this hive mind approach of understanding what we think will work and what won't work. But ultimately, you always then have to test. Even the best game teams that have built billion-dollar games, they're not churning out billion-dollar games of every new concept, right? And they're killing dozens and dozens in some instances. Like the biggest Web2 teams have dozens of teams killing dozens of games, and then maybe after 5 years, one of them hits. And so I'd say it's a combination of one, an instinct and having knowledge to be able to make a decision and hone in on what we're going to build. But ultimately, the market never lies. And so it's super important to get the build out into players' hands and then validate our own thesis. And on some of the occasions, we were right. On some of the occasions, core loops that we thought, okay, there's something here, actually it wasn't, and the market didn't respond to it, and we killed it.
As a quick tandem, I can understand how like teams work on something that maybe didn't hit the KPIs that were set out for it and then get laid off. I think we've seen like a ton of that over the past 12 months and 12 months plus. I think it's a different thing being a small studio and like killing your children like one after the other.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious how as a CEO, like how do you deal with the potential churn that comes from that? Like I would assume that a lot of the people on the team just get a bit disheartened, and like after 5 failed attempts, I don't know.
Yeah,
How do you view that?
it's a really great question, and after each, or as I'm seeing the writing on the wall, or some of us are seeing the writing on the wall, that actually this game doesn't seem like it's going to go into production. What's everyone's sort of position going to be? How are they going to feel? Are they still going to be as motivated? Ultimately, I'd say it starts well before, they've even joined the studio. So from a recruitment perspective, being really transparent with where we were and what the process would be, and that we're not married to our products, we're married to our vision. I think that is really important. We have a question where, particularly for each discipline, we ask everyone what they're really excited about if we succeeded, and if it's actually, as an artist, I built this character or I built this hero. For us, rightly and wrongly, it's an amber flag. We always rely and look back on, well, I contributed to this game and this vision. So what you do on I guess, a macro level and your contribution is of vital importance. But what's even more important is the vision and the studio's long-term goals. And that's a very different type of individual that wants to join. They're not joining to build the best art or write the cleanest code that's the most performant or be really hands-on when it comes to game design and be able to A/B test 100 times their sort of designs. What they're ruthlessly focused on is, this is the studio's vision and goal, and this is the area that I can contribute to create value to move us forward to that goal. And so we center a lot of our recruitment and finding those people that are more excited about the goal than they are their actual craft.
Kim, you mentioned really focusing on the core loop, getting user feedback, ensuring you're hitting certain metrics, and then maybe layering on the Web3 implementations later on. I'm curious, does that speak towards your philosophy regarding where Web3 fits in games? So in other words, if you're focused on the core loop initially and then you're bringing in the Web3 features later on, do you feel that Web3 maybe lends itself to the metagame? And as such, when you're doing the user interviews on the Web3 side, you're actually checking and figuring out how these people interact with the metagame. Whereas earlier in development, you're looking for those mid-core gamers, like you mentioned. And does this kind of dovetail nicely for the games you guys are building, which are core titles where the metagame is so important? Does that make sense?
Yes and no, because our thesis is that live ops acts as the on-ramp to our on-chain ecosystems, and live ops, aren't this sort of excluded extension that's part of a game. They're deeply entrenched within not only the meta, but then how those items, the progression, the different time limited events intersect with the core loop too. And so I'd say it's difficult to isolate that and say, you have the core loop, but then you have the multiplayer part, and then you have the Web3 part, and then you have this meta layer.
So switching lanes a little bit, I want to say that you started Pixion Games in like 2019, roundabouts, and so mobile distribution has obviously changed a bunch since then. And I'm curious how you think the current state of things post IDFA has changed the way you build games and think about go to market.
Yeah, massively. I mean, it's a huge shift that the team actually made itself. And so we actually started in 2018. We started to build, and we built what we'd now call a free versus free real-time multiplayer brawler. This was before Brawl Stars was released, and we launched it. It had incredible retention, not just day one, but day 30, day 60 was really, really sticky. And our app DAO was 40 plus cents. We were profitable for every player coming in less than 90 days. As a founder, it's like, okay, this is a title. This is a one that's going to hit. We just raised then some capital as well in 2019 based off the data and the quality of the game. And then on a tangent to frame sort of my answer, Supercell released Brawl Stars, and we already knew it was in soft launch. And they did it better than us, like production value, quality, animation. It was all better than what we had achieved at that time. But our CPIs also tripled. And so now we weren't only profitable in 90 days, it was nearly a year before we'd see a single dollar back for every player, and it was only increasing. And then IDFA happened 4 months after, and our CPIs rose even again, right? And so now we're looking at, well, it's 10 to 12 months. If we put in a dollar now, hopefully by October next year, we get $1.01 back. And for any startup, being able to compete first and foremost on a user acquisition basis, you're having to sink millions of dollars now to be able to gain that critical mass, of which maybe 4, 5, 6% will convert into payers. But every month you're sinking millions of dollars, so tens of millions of dollars a year, knowing that actually you're not going to be profitable for close to a year plus, and now a year is good, right? And so as a founder, I'm thinking, well, I need to raise at least $30 million, of which 80% will just go into UA, and I'm not going to get a single dollar back on that spend, which is a huge risk to take, particularly when it's then against, one of the biggest players in mobile gaming history in Supercell. And ultimately, we had to kill the game, which was probably the hardest out of all the games we killed. That was the hardest, and probably one of the hardest moments as a founder at Pixion, because we weren't killing a game that wasn't successful, didn't retain, didn't monetize. It was a really good game, and it was monetizing, and we were profitable and were scaling. But a much bigger incumbent came in and killed us off. And so your moat now wasn't the ability to pivot and speed of development and make decisions, or even having a new core loop where you'd taken a risk and brought something fresh to the market. It was, do you have enough capital to get it into enough eyeballs that even if it costs you $70, that person's going to spend $75. And so we really lost faith in distribution on mobile. And this was in mid 2020. And so we started to look at PC. We started to look at browser-based games. We started to look at multiple platforms. And we also then stumbled upon this game called Axie Infinity. Now, this was obviously before it started to really spike in 21. But what we saw is that they had this really, really small but growing and quickly growing core audience that were real brand evangelists, and they were almost fanatics. Some of the messages and how much they were responding, how much they were engaging. Long story short, we essentially decided that tokenization can create superior incentives. Those incentives need to go to the right players, but if you can create hyper-personalized experiences, create turbocharged incentives, that can result in better unit economics, a superior moat when it comes to distribution, but also disrupt user acquisition where it was at the time. And that's still our play. That's still our belief.
Did the recent boom in Telegram mini apps help kind of cement that belief? What to you is the line that you have to walk to not make Pixion a meme, but at the same time leverage the best of what Web3 offers?
Yeah, and I think that's probably a question every game team asks themselves every day, and sometimes it maybe gets different answers depending on the week. Our focus has always been outlining and understanding quality players, and ultimately that's where we want to incentivize the most. But of course, user acquisition and tokenization or tokenized assets do allow you to create a top funnel activation that, whether it's for branding purposes, whether it's for actually just bringing in players and seeing then who converts, who moves further down the funnel, who turns into engaged players. It's a part of the mix. And I think this will be, again, a live thesis that we have an idea of what that will be, but it's one that's going to continuously evolve as we run experiments and do those things and run those campaigns and activations and incentivize the players in different ways. But ultimately, we'll always go back to this token should be an incentive for the types of players and that we find a quality. And that doesn't necessarily just mean, okay, it's Alex who will play 2 hours a day. It could be multiple different personas, but once we identify the personas that we want to be part of our game, or we want to essentially cater for, it's then looking at how we create the right incentives, and in some instances those incentives can be very different.
Going back to one of the earlier comments you were making about crypto adding this kind of incentive layer that you can creates this kind of unique creative surface that you can experiment with UA and other things. I'm curious, are there any favorite kind of incentive driven experiments or new types of personas that have emerged from these experiments that you can maybe talk about a little bit?
So we're actually getting to that point now where those experiments are going to start running. So I couldn't say, we've run XYZ and we've seen the result. Obviously, there's games that have launch tokens and they're live. I'd say the challenge is how do you embed these different personas, but also allow yourself to be attractive to an audience that, you know, is hundreds of millions of people. And so if you really want to build for a huge addressable audience where you've got tens and tens of millions of monthly active users, there's a lot of juggling, I guess, there. And so for us, it's not looking at building for a specific niche, but building and maybe starting with a niche and with a clear route to scale and expand.
And that just about wraps it up. Thanks, Cam, for coming on. It's been really interesting, talking a lot about, I guess, your philosophy for building games, how you're looking at Web3 as top of funnel UA incentives, and yeah, just hearing more about Fableborne. Very excited for the launch. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
The content of this video is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. The views shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may hold investments in some of the companies or digital assets featured in the video.